Welcome to another fabulous edition of Comet Algebra. This video is for Algebra 1, Chapter 4, Section 6, Absolute Value Equations. So today we're going to learn how to solve equations that involve the absolute value symbols. So first let's remember, we studied absolute value. The definition of absolute value was how far is the number from zero. Absolute value was a distance. So I want you to think about that. When we studied the absolute value, consider the absolute value of 4. The absolute value of x equals 4. If you think about what could go inside here, there are really two numbers that you could put inside this absolute value that would give you an answer of 4. Can you think what the two answers could be? Well, I hope you realized or you remembered that the absolute value of positive 4 is 4. So that's one of the answers for this x. X could be 4. But we can't stop there because with absolute value we end up with two answers because you could go both ways from 0. Remember, the absolute value of a negative 4 is also 4. So I have to include that answer also. So this equation, the absolute value of 4, has two answers. Almost every absolute value equation has two answers, and you must find both of them. So let's look here in the list method, the steps, how you find both answers. And once again, we'll talk about these steps, and they will make more sense to you after you look at an example. So step 1 says, if you can, simplify anything inside the absolute value symbols. Kind of treat them like parentheses. Anything you could add, maybe combine some like terms if possible. Then if there's other numbers around the absolute value, like if you're multiplying the entire absolute value by something or adding or subtracting after it, you need to get rid of that. And we call that isolate the absolute value itself. After the absolute value is all by itself, here's where you stop and you double your work by writing two equations. One equation is equal to the positive answer and one is equal to the negative answer. We have to do this plus minus so that we get both solutions. And then you just solve your two equations separately, and it's a good idea to check your answers. So let's look at a few examples using these steps. All right, in example 1, if I'm looking at step 1, there's really nothing I can combine inside the absolute value. And then I look outside here and I'm not multiplying or adding or anything, so this absolute value is already isolated. So this negative 5x plus 9, remember inside this absolute value, we could get a positive 16, which would give us 16. And we could also end up with a negative 16 inside the absolute value that would give us a positive 16. So that's why we stop right here and double our work. We write an equation, minus 5x plus 9 could equal a positive 16, and that would work. Or we could have minus 5x plus 9 equal to a negative 16, because we see that here that would also work. So after you stop and write your two equations, now you solve them separately. So here if we subtract a 9, we get negative 5x equals 7, divide both sides by negative 5, and we get negative 7/5. That's one of our answers. Over here, we get negative 5x equals negative 25, and dividing both sides by negative 5 gives us a positive 5. So these are the two answers that would work if you plug them into this absolute value. And you can check them if you'd like. So if we plug in the negative 7/5, I have negative 5 times negative 7/5 plus 9, and does that equal 16? Well, here the 5's cancel, and negative times negative is positive, so is 7 plus 9 16, and it is. And then if you want to check your positive 5, go ahead and plug it in for the x and do the math. Negative 5 times positive 5 is negative 25, plus 9 is a negative 16, and that is indeed equal to a positive 16. So both of our answers checked out. All right, let's look at example 2. Now in this example, we actually do have some combining to do inside the absolute value. 8x minus 2x is 6x plus 6. And now this absolute value is isolated, so here's where we stop and double our work. We set this equal to a 4 because the absolute value of 4 is 4. And we set this equal to a negative 4 because the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. So here's where we get our two equations. Start by subtracting a 6 from both sides, and we'd get negative 2. Dividing both sides by 6 is negative 2/6, which reduces to negative 1/3. Over here, start by subtracting a 6 from both sides. 6x equals negative 10. Dividing both sides by 6 is negative 10/6, which reduces to negative 5/3. So there's our two answers for example 2. All right, looking at example 3, there's nothing to combine inside the absolute value, but outside here, I need to get rid of this negative 10 before I write my two equations because the absolute value is not isolated. It's not by itself on one side of the equal sign. So we subtract a 10 from both sides as our first step. And then I have the absolute value of 3x minus 6 is equal to 18. Now it's isolated, and now I'm ready to split it into the two equations and write 3x minus 6 equals 18. 3x minus 6 equals negative 18. And then we solve these separately. I get 3x equals 24, divide by 3, and x equals 8 for one of my answers. Over here, again, adding a 6 to both sides is the first step. I get 3x equals negative 12. Divide both sides by 3, and x is a negative 4 for my other answer. And if you plug those in and try them, they do indeed work. All right, one more example here. In example 4, there's nothing to combine inside the inequality. Inside the absolute value, but it's not isolated because we have this 3 sitting here. So the first step we need to do to isolate the absolute value is divide both sides by 3. And that gives me 4y plus 9 equals 45 in the absolute value. So now the absolute value is isolated. Now we stop and double our work by setting it equal to the positive 45 and setting my absolute value equal to the negative 45. And now we'll solve them separately. This gives me, let's see if I do the math here, 4y is equal to 36. Divide both sides by 4, and the first answer is 9. Over here, once again, we subtract a 9 from both sides, and this gives me 4y equals a negative 54. So I need to divide that by 4, which gives me a fraction, and now I need to reduce this to negative 27 over 2, and that's my other answer. All right, so now you have the knowledge you need for section 4.6, so have fun with math.